Welcome to this week's AECVC. So this week we're going to talk about the P&L of the construction industry and what it's made up of. And we're doing that because the traditional mantra that the venture capital industry has been propagating in the form of software as a service and making software as a service the default, most exciting model to be building as a founder is just not the case necessarily in construction and architecture, engineering, and supply chains, what we call the AECS industry. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you in the numbers of the P&L of the industry why SaaS is a great model to graduate into, but is not always the greatest model to begin with. All right, back at AECVC. This week, we're talking about the P&L of the construction industry. And let me start you off with what I'm not going to talk about. And that is the term software as a service. Who hasn't heard this term within venture land? Software as a service describes the go-to model that the VC industry, especially in the enterprise segment, has backed for the past 10, 15 years, if not longer. And behind it lies a model that looks relatively intuitive to venture capitalists. There's software which they understand because they have empathy from being a user as well as former IT manager, oftentimes as a VC manager. And there's a service model, but it truly isn't, because it is a recurring model where ideally you lock in your customers through a contract that has recurring payment to the software provider, i.e. the startup. And that is a model that VCs have learned to like, because the customer acquisition cost in an enterprise software as a service model can be relatively high depending on how you play it. And it's through the recurringness of the same account keep wiring you money on either a monthly or perhaps even an annual basis that you recover these acquisition costs, and that even sometimes you can generate very strong cash flows if you charge upfront. So software as a service has been the darling of the VC industry. And with it, the VC industry has been propagating to founders, to other VCs, and to, frankly, or even the incumbents, that software as a service is the norm and the darling, the Goldilocks model that they have been chasing. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case in construction necessarily. So let's talk about the first principles. Construction and the entire AECS, architecture, engineering, and supply chain industry next to construction is one thing. It's a project business. And because it is a project business, the incumbents and the people who deliver against the projects, they have to deliver their outcomes against deadlines and against certain quality. And if they don't meet the deadlines under quality, then they are hit with penalties, with real issues. And so that is very different from the first principles that many software as a service startups that sell to enterprises are meeting in any other sector, because they are typically operations businesses that have a continuous flow, for example, manufacturing, or that are white collar businesses with service components, but they are not project businesses under these constraints of very strong deadlines and very strong quality requirements with very strong penalties. And that makes AECS an outcome industry that is used to purchasing outcomes via services, which means that the service providers, the easiest example of that being subcontractors that sell into general contractor projects, they have to guarantee the outcome in order for the GC on the project to purchase them, and they need to have a track record of delivering the outcome against the deadline, against the quality, and then against the budget reliably. That's why AECS is an outcome industry in a project industry purchasing services that guarantee me this outcome. Now, the vertical singularity within this is that services actually address 50 times more market than SaaS within AECS. And that is because, let that sink in, 50 times higher market if I sell services into AECS than if I sell SaaS. And that has to do with the P&L of the construction industry. If you check out the P&L, you will see that out of the revenue, typically a general contractor and the entire industry as a whole makes about 2% net profit margin. This will look different when I'm a manufacturer. It will also look different if I'm an engineering consultant within the industry, right? But for the industry as a whole, that's what it will look like if you use the example of the general contractor, who is the ultimate deliverer of a project. Now, that means that I have 98% cost below the revenue if I want to get to that. And out of these 98% of the cost, almost everything is material or labor, as you can see here on the chart. A lot of the material and the direct labor is hidden in the gross margin, either because the general contractor would purchase it directly or would purchase it through subcontractors or other service providers, both above the gross margin and below the gross margin. And now below the gross margin, you can also see that the distribution costs are actually not the big issue of the industry. There's relatively little share of the revenue actually going into distribution. That has to do with the fact that the acquisition of projects is a relatively transparent process. And it is one that everybody has become accustomed to because it is the defined norm and the defined form of purchasing projects and purchasing the service providers into the projects. Now, below the contribution margin, so in the general administrative overhead costs, we see that there's indirect labor, there's insurance, facilities, supplies that account for about 7%. And then there's this little item, the IT budgets. And so the IT budgets within the P&L of such an industry project would only be 2, maybe 3% of what you can address. And in many firms, actually, it's less than that. So if you look at this study from 2015 by JB Knowledge, you will see that 76% of the general contractors within the industry spend less than 1% of their revenue on IT. 76% less than 1%, and only 12% spend more than 3%, equal or more than 3%. Fast forward to 2021, which is the last time JB Knowledge updated this study, you still see that 58% spend less than 1% on IT, 25% spend 3% or more. So, which is great because it means that the industry as a whole is adopting more software and it is spending more on software, right? So we dropped from 76% to 58% on the 1% scale, and we increased, basically doubled the amount or the share of GCs that purchase for 3% or more of their revenue IT. That is great as a direction, but still it is minuscule. Why? Because out of the 98% cost basis below the revenue to get to the net profit of the industry, it still only makes 2 or 3% in the IT budgets. And that's why software as a service is not necessarily the best approach. If you want to really attack the 50 times larger market, you will have to go after the materials and the services in a model that guarantees the outcomes for this industry. And over time, and that is my thesis, that allows you to build track record with the industry, with the customers that you're serving. And it allows you, because you have the track record, to do progressive discovery with them. Hey, what else could I do for you in the form of a model, how I deliver it? And perhaps that model is software. But starting with the software allows me not necessarily to address the critical item within the P&L in the industry and the critical mode of delivery that guarantees against the project, deadlines and quality and outcome. And that's why I'm pleading to founders that, hey, don't follow the generic VC mantra. Follow the vertical singularities and follow your customers. And they will tell you that if you can guarantee me the outcome, you just happen to do it with software, I will be more adoptive of your solution, 1. And 2, you can still transition into the software as a service model over time as you do progressive discovery with your customers because you earn the track record with them and they will trust you in this industry that takes a lot of risk with high penalties if they don't deliver projects. And we do have substantial number of examples in our portfolio who have started like that and progressed into something that is more akin to a SaaS model over time. So hit me up if you want to discuss this. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Make sure that you subscribe under aecvc.com and you can also find me on LinkedIn. See you next time.